it's been a while since we've talked, and what what is going on? I mean, we haven't talked in a while.
Well, I appreciate that you sent me a link. I listened to the one we did. It must have been almost 15 years ago. And on the way home, stuck in traffic, I listened to it. And there were a couple of things that really stood out to me. By the way, one of them was that was all that time ago, and you were podcasting, and it's obvious to me that I didn't really know what podcasting was. I mean, I was talking about the threat of the internet to those of us who were doing AM talk radio, but I was referring to it as, stuff that might possibly happen on the internet, and I didn't sort of clue in, I think, based on listening to me, that that's what you were doing. I mean, you were pretty early in this game.
Yeah, I started I started messing around in 2008, and then in 2009 I really started it, formally, and I created a company. But yeah, because a lot of people early on, that's why it was easier for me to get people. So you were very gracious because you were an early interview I did. You were 30, I think number 35, and you were a longtime radio pro, and people were like, "Wait, what is this? What's going on here?" And then now, of course, everybody's podcasting, so it's no big deal. It's hard for me to get some people to come on because it's like, you know, they they can go on like a million podcasts or they can have their own podcast.
Okay, but I want to say something about that because now I know more about it. And
Okay.
uh, people will talk about how the podcast, like I'm doing my radio show, and they go, well, I've got all I got to do is fire up my computer and I can compete with you. Yeah. And if you're really good and if you're smart and you're hardworking, you can do it. But what happens is most of them flame out because they realize, I do this as a full-time job. If you want to put yourself in a position of doing it as a full-time job, maybe you can become the next Joe Rogan. But the thing is, most people put up a podcast. Well, they have to go to work every day and they find out that, it's not that simple. And it's not that they wouldn't have the capabilities, but they're trying to maybe for an hour after dinner compete with people who spend all day doing it. And so
Yeah.
it's not about whether I'm on the radio or you're on the computer you're doing it into your cell phone. That's not what it's about, is can you bring the content? And it's kind of hard.
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah, because I think you're a really good talk radio pro. That's why I interviewed you several years ago. And what do you think it takes to do good talk radio for the prep and so forth?
Well, in terms of the prep, I think, well, here's the first thing that I always say to people, and this is different than a podcast. People say to me, what do you think it takes to be a successful talk show host? And I'll say, get on a successful radio station. That's a good place to start because then you're on second base, so to speak. You've already got an audience that people are trained to listen to that radio station. I really believe that a huge part of succeeding on a day-to-day basis on a talk radio show is topic selection. After that, it comes down to what you bring to it as a host. Are you compelling? Can you tell a story? Can you move the thing forward? Do you know when it's time to hang up on a phone call? Do you look at the phone bank and know, hey, that person's going to disagree with me for this reason? That's going to be interesting. So you're making those choices as you go along and you learn to do that. But I really believe it's talking about the right thing.
That's true. Okay, like
Like
what's
think
the
about it. I'm sorry, Margaret, but think about this when you get together with people for a Thanksgiving dinner and you're sitting there with a whole bunch of people around the table and you want to engage a conversation. You could talk about something that is interesting to only Margaret, or you could talk about something that generally the family is interested in. Which one is the better selection?
hmm But wait, how do you define the right thing?
Well, I look at what's going on in the news and know after a while, I mean, you know what your audience reacts to, but what's important in the news, not what you think people have to know, because that can be boring. It's lecturing then, it's sort of preaching. What's going on in the news that you think will impact people in their lives or that people just find curious? I mean, by that, I mean, I don't just talk about politics. I'll give you an example. Yesterday on my show, I had a woman who she's an employment lawyer. And there was research that showed the vast majority of Canadians don't like the diversity, equity, inclusion policies for hiring. They want the best person hired, regardless. Okay. And in the context, my friend, her name is Sunira Chaudhry, said to me, she's also my friend, but I brought her on because of her expertise. And she said, well, I don't want to think that I'm hired because I have brown skin or because I'm a woman. And I said, maybe you got hired because you're pretty. And because she is. And somebody wrote to me and said, man, she accepted that as a compliment instead of, a lawsuit against you or something. So today I followed up on it and did a topic on what can men say to women in a complimentary fashion and not be accused of something creepy.
That's
So,
true.
but people find that sort of stuff interesting.
Yeah, but then I know that is your show political, or your show's still
Mostly.
political now, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
mostly.
okay, we're not here to talk about politics itself, but
No.
in your show though, you're taking a certain angle, right? So those, what if those people don't agree with your political views? I mean, or is it possible to do a show that's just general and not politically oriented?
Well, I do both. I like to throw topics in that, like the one I just described, that aren't political to give it some variety. But well, of course, people are going to disagree with me because I take a very solid position. I'm a fiscal conservative. I'm not a hardcore social conservative, but I'm a fiscal conservative, and government ticks me off on a regular basis. And so I find that important because there's a saying. You might say you're not interested in politics, but politics is interested in you. And like whether you like it or not, your taxes might go up, like those kinds of things. And so I think the trick there is, yeah, this is a political topic, but how does it impact the average person? That's the thing I have to talk about.
Yeah, but isn't Canada quite different than the US in terms of political structure and economic structure
I don't know.
in
Donald
terms of
Trump said the
services?
other day that we should be the 51st state. You know what's funny about that is that he said, do you think he thinks that's going to happen? No, but it's funny to watch people light their hair on fire when something like that happens. I
Yeah.
didn't even talk about that on my show because I don't care because it was just a joke. But Canada is different. We talked about this 15 years ago when you did that first podcast with me. We have the parliamentary system like Britain. And so we have three political parties that dominate and then a sort of a fourth one. We actually have a party that represents the province of Quebec, which is dominantly French. Some of those people are French separatists. They're a federal party that only represents one province. That's like having a federal party that competes with the Democrats and the Republicans, but it's only in Texas. And some Texans wouldn't mind that, by the way. I spent a lot of time in Texas, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So you have the four, you have the conservatives, you have the liberals, you have the Bloc Québécois, they're called, that I just talked about, and then you have the NDP, which they're a bunch of crazy socialists.
Yeah. But then I'm just wondering, in Canada, like how in the US, Rush Limbaugh really changed a lot. Gosh, I wish got to interview the guy, but you know how he really changed radio because he took that angle, the conservative angle, and then a lot of people came around and they started talking like that too. And some people have even told me that some of those talkers were not really conservative; they just knew that it sold.
Yeah,
But did
we did talk about that last time you and I spoke. And I don't think you can do several hours of radio every day, a lot of which is extemporaneous. No matter how much you plan, you've got if you take callers, if you have guests, if you start talking about things, so you don't write script for the whole thing. So there's a lot of extemporaneous speaking. And I don't think anybody, including Rush, would be brilliant enough to be able to tell a lie for hours every day, 5 days a week. You can't do it. You have to speak from the heart. The guy that Howard Stern used to call pig vomit, he calls it
yeah,
in the movie, his
who
name was,
I interviewed him for this podcast.
okay, Kevin Matheny.
Yes.
I worked with Kevin. I also worked with his father at one point, but I worked with Kevin. Kevin was a liberal. Did you know that?
Yes, I do. Yeah, he told
Yeah.
me that. Yeah, he told me that, but he obviously did a good job setting up certain stations. He told me about Milwaukee that he set up and some other stations. Yeah.
Yeah, he was a liberal. And he said to me, I don't agree with almost everything you say. However, I like having you on the radio because I know you believe what you say. And that honesty is what I'm looking for.
Yeah, he was a really incredible programmer in that way because he thought about the content and the delivery instead of like if he agreed with things or not. But okay, can you just talk about Kevin Matheny? I know we talked many years ago, but tell us about your experience with Kevin Matheny and his father. And Kevin Matheny unfortunately passed away.
Yes. Well, I worked with his father when I was still in music radio for a short period of time, but that ended up being fortuitous, not only that I enjoyed working with him and had that job, but then I went to Minneapolis and I was trying to wheedle my way into Minneapolis radio. I didn't have a
Wait,
job.
sorry, where did you work for him? Where did you first work for him? His
I worked
father.
for Terrell Matheny, Kevin's father, in Toledo, Ohio, on a music station. And then my wife was working in Minnesota, and Terrell Matheny left. He had replaced the morning guy, who was also the program director, with me because the morning guy wasn't entertaining. And but as soon as Terrell Matheny left, the guy got rid of me. The program, I knew it was coming. And I went back to Minneapolis where my wife was. We didn't have to travel back and forth anymore. And it was because of Terrell that I got an interview with Kevin. Again, it was still a music station. It was Cool 108 in Minneapolis. But I got an interview with him and I started working with him as a part-time disc jockey. And then we both moved on and went our different ways. And then I was back in Chicago. I was in Chicago, WLS in the morning, WABC at night. I was doing that 5 days a week. It was very cool until ABC Disney sold their radio stations and a whole bunch of us got blown out. And Kevin was programming WGN in Chicago. Well, but of course, we knew one another, and he'd listened to me on WLS, and he liked what I did. So he called me up, and I got to tell you, if you watch that Howard Stern movie, my view of
What's that?
Kevin Matheny was completely different. I got along with him really well, but
But wasn't his character in the Howard Stern movie a combination of two people?
well, that might be a part of it.
Okay.
I don't know that. I thought it was entirely Kevin Matheny, but maybe you're right. Maybe it was just program directors he didn't like, and he put it all into character, which was well played by Paul Giamatti. But
Yeah.
still, I got along very well with Kevin. But I found out that Kevin is like some other managers I've worked with. When they start yelling at you, yell back, and then they sort of like back off a little bit, and then you can have a conversation. I never had a problem with him. Yeah, in fact, I'll give you a funny story. I saw him go down the hall. I was filling in on an evening show, and I saw him practically dragging his briefcase down the hall at like 10 o'clock at night on his way home. And then I screwed something up, and the hotline rang. He's in his car in the radio. And oh my God. So I answered studio, and he said, "Do you have language issues here on your podcast?"
No, I don't.
Okay. Uh, he said, "That last break sounded fucking unprepared." And I said, "Well, there's a pretty good reason for that, Kevin." And he goes, "What would that be?" "It was fucking unprepared." "Oh, well, don't do that." And that was it.
Well, the thing about the yelling is it's interesting you say you should yell back because sometimes when you yell back at managers, it backfires on you. So why do you think that's a good idea?
Because I don't want to spend the rest of my life having a tiptoe around the manager. We might as well find out where we're at.
But
But I've been fortunate in that some of them realize, okay, maybe I was coming on a little too strong there, and I think a lot of strong, if they have any self-confidence themselves, if they don't, then you've got a problem. But if they have any self-confidence themselves, I think they don't mind a strong personality either. You know,
hmm, okay,
but I'm not
because
recommending people yell at their bosses. I'm just telling you what my experience has been.
well then that so you've never been fired for that or sidelined
Not
for
for
that?
that.
Okay, because I know people who were totally sidelined for doing that, for
Yeah.
yelling at the managers, or because the managers were playing games with them, they weren't treating them well, and
Yeah,
then
well
they get,
then then it's time for you to move on anyway. So, like why put up with that? Why let people treat you like crap? Like I just think in that case it's always worked well enough for me. I've been let go from a number of radio stations, but it was never for that.
yeah. How did you deal with being let go from a number of radio stations?
Well, it's believe it or not, if it's never happened to you, it gets easier because you actually you don't like it. My kids didn't like it. I'd come home and I'd let the family know that I've been let go, and especially when the kids are younger, it's not like oh, I'm sorry about that, Dad. The first thing is, are we moving?
Oh wow.
That's hard on kids.
Mm.
It's hard on everybody to pack everything up and go to a new town. Some people will do their entire life in one town, but you can't put together a radio career very well that way unless you're lucky enough to, start from zero and get on in Chicago and you just stay there for the rest of your life. And I guess some people do that, um, but what happens after a while is you realize they didn't kill me. they just took away my job. And there were a couple of times where things got tough. They got tough financially a couple of times. Have you ever had to go to the food bank?
No,
I
but I know
have.
it exists. But yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Where
yeah,
was
I have.
that?
It took me a long time. It was after I left Chicago and came here to Toronto. It was in between. When I got the job here in Toronto, well, then I'm employed and, talk radio in the bigger cities pays okay. So then I was fine. But it was a problem. And I was living in Cary, Illinois, and I went to a church organized food bank there. And it was a long time before I talked about that on the radio. But I've mentioned it a few times now. And what I always say is, worst day of my life, when I had to walk into a food bank to augment what I could put on the table for my family. Best day of my life. I walked back in to that same food bank and said, here's a check.
Oh,
Keep
that's
doing your
nice.
work.
So how long did you have to go to that food bank?
Well, it wasn't that long because I lost the WLS thing and I was only part-time at WGN and the perfect storm. I got hit at the very same time with the housing crisis in the US. And so really everything fell apart and I was essentially bankrupt. And but then it was a short period of time. I got this job and I came back here. I mean, I don't know what it would have been like if I'd have had to experience that for a year or something. But it was just enough of a hit that I had that experience. And then I got the thing here and there was that day that I could walk back in and give a check to them and it really felt good.
That's nice. And I'm glad you're telling this story because I did see you in Toronto shortly after you started. 'Cause it was
Yeah.
2010, and that's when you started at CFRB.
Yeah. Why were you here, by the way? I was wondering that.
Because my husband and I like to go places, but he doesn't like to fly. So we're like, let's just drive to Toronto. So we've driven there a number of times. And so I
Okay.
thought, okay, I'm up here. I also have a couple friends there. So I thought, okay, I'm up here. I'll talk to Jerry Agar. I know he just moved here. But of course, I didn't want to ask you personal things about the situation down
Oh, I don't
here.
mind that. I don't
Okay.
mind
Well,
that.
now I'm sure it's different. There's more distance. But the thing
Well,
is that, yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I think you have to be willing to be personal to do talk radio. That's part of the thing of, don't tell a lie. If you're not a conservative, then don't be one on the air. I always try to tell people too, on those occasions when I've been asked to come speak at a radio program at a college or something like that. You and I touched on this on the previous podcast, and that is the biggest part of being honest is be yourself. Don't have somebody else tell you how to be Margaret Larkin or how to be Jerry Agar or how to be, just be you. And you'll be better off if ultimately you fail being you than fail trying to be whatever some program director or consultant tells you to be.
That's true. But the thing is, okay, well, a couple things you brought up. You said being fired and then you were able to, you got other jobs. I mean, I know you had that food experience, but nowadays, if you're fired, you may not be able to get another job. Or if you have problems at a radio station, you may not be able to get another job.
Well, there are fewer jobs. And that's the real unfortunate part of it. And it isn't so simple as to, okay, well, I've got these skills and I have an audience. And so I'm just going to go home and fire up my computer and do a podcast. And you know what? Margaret, I wouldn't mind doing a podcast as opposed to radio, partly because then I could do it wherever I want to be. I would really like to be able to do a lot more traveling and be places I want to be. And if I could just do that but I don't know how to monetize this thing, Margaret.
It's hard. Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is that you've already been in regular broadcast media because, like Joe Rogan, great example. He was on TV, he had a huge following. Of course, his podcast is top tier, but he already had this big audience and he had a lot of exposure. And some other people, too, obviously, some well-known people who have their own podcasts. So they're able to tell the audience, hey, listen to my podcast. And then they already have that. But so you sort of have that as well because you've already been on the air for many years. People know who you are, but monetizing it is hard. You have to get your sponsors, etc. And
Well,
you have to hit.
yeah, I'm also too disinclined, too lazy, whatever you want to apply to it, to do the sales. I don't want to run around and find sales.
Yeah.
And I'm more willing at this point in my life to put that effort into that. So, and I have the radio job, so I'm not doing it. But if I lost my job now, I don't think the instant answer would be I'll do a podcast.
Hmm.
I
Yeah, I know.
wouldn't.
It's really, yeah, no, I mean, yeah, you'd have to be able to do the sales and so forth or have a day job like I have, and then you do the podcasting on the side. But think the back to the finding a job. So what do you tell people who really love radio and they want to work in it, but it's really hard to make a living in it or even get a job?
Well, try and wheedle your way into something at the radio station. I mean, we have certainly over time, even the time that I've been here, have had people come into the station and do whatever it is that they do, where they can get a job in the promo department and all of those things are smaller than they used to be. But if you can just get in the radio station, you might find a way to get yourself on air. And if you've got any wherewithal, then you may make something happen and start to create something for yourself. But I don't know. I guess if I was 22, maybe I still have a lot of energy for a person my age. I just have a disinclination to go sell. But if I was 22 years old and I thought I had a product, then maybe I'd have the energy to do that. I'm going to get up in the morning and I'm going to spend this many hours on my podcast, and I'm going to go do sales, and then I'm going to do this, and I'm going to make this thing work. Well, maybe you could do that. I just but I think the first thing you have to ask yourself if you're a young person is, where is the future of this thing? Is it really on the radio? It might not be.
Yeah, because there are some people making very good livings on YouTube. So what they do is they have a YouTube channel, then they have, social media, and then they also have a podcast. So it's like I always call it the enchilada of media now. It's di a digital enchilada, and there people are making good living. And you probably never heard of some of these people, but they call them influencers, but these are people who are influencers with, good content.
Well, it can be so simple. There's a woman here in Toronto named Yolanda Gamp. I don't know her. I just know of her. Here's what she does, Margaret. She makes cakes on, and she was doing it just as a YouTube thing. And a producer of television shows saw her, liked her, said, "Hey, let's work together. We can ramp this up." Went to the Food Channel, not interested. He said, "Well, I'm really interested." So he put together an actual television kitchen as opposed to her trying to do it with her cell phone in her own kitchen. And they started doing it. She vastly outperforms the Food Channel. They should have said
Yeah.
yes, but I
Yeah.
guess they didn't get it. She's just cake decorating, and she'll get hundreds of thousands of people watching, some how to make a Valentine's cake or something like that. So that doesn't mean it's simple. I mean, she caught on to something, but it's all about amplifying a niche now, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And there are so many people out there ready for good content. But okay, I want to go back to Matheny for a second because you talked about his dad, and what was Kevin Matheny's dad like?
Oh, I think quite different than Kevin. He would personify, in my memory and mind, and he's living back in Arkansas now. He personifies the classic example of the Southern gentleman.
Hmm.
He would always be polite. He was always very nice, and found a nice way to say things. And that's how I remember working with him. But I worked with him for a short period of time because he made that change at the radio station where he thought the program director slash morning host didn't have the personality for the morning. And he found me. And then that was a difficult situation, one of my more difficult situations, because I was put in there to do a morning show with a program director who didn't want me. And so
How do you
then,
deal with? Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
well, I just came in every morning and did the best that I could, and we got off to a horribly bad start because not only was that the situation, when I was negotiating with Terrell to take the job, I had learned something from the consultant Dan O'Day.
Yeah, I've heard of him.
Yeah, well, here's what I learned from him. Sometimes, especially in smaller markets, you'll want to put together a contract, and they say, "Well, we don't do contracts." So what you say is, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, that's fine." And this is what I did exactly. I said, "Yeah, that's fine, Terrell. But we've talked about some things here. So why don't you just send me a letter?" I think I actually got it in the form of a letter at that time, and just outlining the deal that we've talked about. And as soon as I get your letter, I'm going to give my notice, and I'm on my way. Well, one of the things I had negotiated is, hey, the morning show's a little more difficult than the rest of the day on an FM music station, and quite frankly, my wife's going to be in Minneapolis, so I just want to do the show Monday to Friday. I'll work really hard Monday to Friday to do the morning show. I don't want to do a weekend show. And he said, okay, and he put that on the piece of paper. I show up day one. program directors going through things with me, and we'll do this and we'll do this. And the show was, I think the show was 6 to 10. Might have been 5 to 10 now that I think about it in the morning. And then he said, but we'll make the Saturday morning easier for you. That'll just be 6 to 9. I said, well, I don't do Saturday morning. He said, no, the morning guy does. I said, no, I don't. And he got up and left. He went down the hall to talk to Daryl and he came back. All right. And then he went, but he was ticked. And because he totally lost control. And you know what? The writing's on the wall day one, don't you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Terrell moved on, and I've been in contact with him. I talked to him a little bit ago, but I didn't work with him a great long time. But I just remember that I enjoyed the time with him.
And then about Kevin Metheny, because I worked with him worked for him briefly. That's how I got the interview with him. But how would you compare his real personality with what people see in the Howard Stern movie?
Well, I think he could be probably like a lot of good program directors, entrepreneurs. I mean, people who have a vision of what they want to do. I see this in my son, who's an entrepreneur, and that is for those kinds of people, person who has a vision of what the radio station is going to be, person who has a vision of what the business is going to be. You're either helping execute the vision or you're kind of in the way. And that's how they come across. And so if you don't get what it is they're trying to do and you're not with that program, it's going to be difficult. And so I'm sure there were people who found Kevin difficult to deal with. I didn't because he brought me into the radio station. He knew what he was getting, and that's what he wanted. And so, he knew what he was getting personally because we'd worked together before, and he knew what I was going to sound like because he listened to me on WLS all the time. So we really, we were in a pretty good position. We knew each other and where we were at. So I never had a problem with him, but I don't think I was ever going to be a long-term fit for WGN. I'm a little too aggressive.
Yeah, and yeah, I was gonna say that too because well, back to Kevin Metheny though. In terms of his personality though, how would you describe his personality? Because you know how he was sort of hopped up in the movie.
Yeah, well, I think that I would remember his personality as being sort of, would you call it an A-type personality? Like he knew he wanted and he wasn't afraid to tell you what he wanted.
Oh,
He
okay.
was certainly not shy. He did get accused by some of not being the best guy for women to work for. I don't know because I'm not a woman, but that might have been the case.
Okay. No, I was gonna say because I noticed that when I interviewed him, and then people said, well, because it ended up on Howard Stern, parts of it, and he's like, "Oh, this is really boring." And I think why people thought it was sort of boring is because he was way more mild than what the movie portrays. So,
Oh, well, the movie hyped everything up, including Howard.
yeah. Now
Yeah.
another thing. Okay, another thing is you're talking about not being a good fit for WGN. So let's go back to WGN for a second. So WGN used to be like very friendly, mellow, sort of uh, you know, the kind of radio that you take along with you. And then when Kevin came, it became much more aggressive sounding and popped more. So why do you think he did that or why did he do that?
Well, maybe he thought the time had come for radio to stop sounding like your mom's radio. Yeah, WGN was like, don't offend anybody. And I do remember a time I was just first on WGN. It might have been one of my first shows. And for some reason, Roger Ebert, who was still alive at that time, made some commentary about how much better off America would be if they had Canadian healthcare. And, on WGN, what they might have done was, well, let's talk about what the differences might be between the Canadian healthcare system and the American healthcare system. What some people might not realize. No, that's not my style. My style is, what the hell does Roger Ebert know about the Canadian healthcare system? I'm Canadian. I'll tell you about the system, and here's what's wrong with it. Because Roger Ebert knows movies, but he doesn't know anything about this. Well, that's
Mm.
how I approach things. And that wasn't WGN, really, or it's not what WGN had been.
Yeah, because the word I was looking for is it was companion radio. It wasn't
Yes.
like, a WLS talk radio. But I'm just wondering when Kevin went there, and he changed the format, why he thought it would be better to not be companion radio anymore because it was that style for so long. And then people, of course, rebelled against it. Even insiders were very upset. They used to send insider information to people about what was going on.
Oh, I know that some of them weren't very happy with me being on there. I mean, there was a change coming along, and rightly or wrongly, I think that maybe he looked at somebody like Rush Limbaugh, who was the 800-pound gorilla of radio, and he was saying, maybe he knew that if AM radio is going to survive, let's stop pretending it's 1955, okay? Because that's kind of what they were doing. And I don't know. Do you think that Kevin Metheny left, but he evolved the radio station, don't you think?
Yeah, yeah, it changed. But I remember when you were there, and well, first I was listening, and I thought, I mean, I think you're very good at talk radio. It doesn't matter what your opinions are. I do hear the passion and so forth, and I think with some people, I really do think that Rush Limbaugh had an effect on people where they thought, I better talk about certain things on the air, and they didn't sound authentic. And they also sounded like they were talking about certain they would deliver certain lines and they would just rotate and it wasn't very deep. And I think that's still happening today in talk radio where some people repeat the same ideas again and again.
Yeah,
And I don't know
because
why
that's all
people
they've
do that.
got. They've got two or three talking points, right? They don't
Right.
actually have any depth, as you said, in the thing. I mean, I've had this issue, came up when you and I talked on that first podcast about, some people will say I'm angry. And we used to do this thing, it died during COVID, but apparently they're going to bring it back. We used to do this thing at our radio station here in Toronto called Live and Interactive. And basically, we sold tickets to a theater show, and we were the show. We sold out a theater, and we would get up and we would talk. And we sold, like, people came in, they had dinner, and it's a great event. And then it was the panel of us, and the program director was the host of it. And the very first one, we had announced on the air we're doing it, and we had a way for people to send in questions that they might want the moderator to ask. It was the very first one, and it was the very first question. And he looked at me and said, people want to know, why is Jerry Agar so angry? And I said, I'm not angry. I'm passionate.
Right,
And
exactly.
it became a theme of the show, kind of. There's a difference. And
Yeah.
if all you're doing, like, imagine that you think it's about being angry and then you're manufacturing anger. Like, who could do that?
Well, but I have heard that on the air.
But what did you think? This isn't real.
No, it's not real. I don't like to listen to it. That's why I
Right.
thought you were really good because I thought, no, this guy doesn't sound angry. You sound very passionate. But with some people, their delivery line, their tagline, or their the punchline is yelling, 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 yelling. It's like they'll talk and talk, and then they'll yell, and I'll think that's what your crescendo is. I mean, it's not good talk radio.
Your crescendo, so to speak, can be delivering things with passion, and then
Yeah.
you stop, and in a normal voice, you say something no one expected to hear, something powerful, as a fact or whatever it is you're laying into the story, and you want the listener to do that. Like, wow, where did that come from? But you can only do that if you actually understand and believe in the topic.
But have you
That's
always
why,
been?
I'm sorry, that's why, by the way, I'd rather, as conservative as I am, if I listen to somebody else, I would rather listen to a passionate, articulate, smart liberal than somebody pretending to be a conservative.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. Because I think for some years there were people pretending because they would, like I said, it's like they didn't really do the research and they thought, I just have to deliver some of these, these important words so people will get that I'm conservative. I thought, I don't think you really believe what you're saying. I think you're just doing that as a show, as a shallow show.
Okay,
So,
maybe there's a personal thing attached to this, but the reason I lost my job on WLS was that a manager who wasn't the manager who hired me decided that the future of talk radio was Mancow and off of FM radio and onto talk radio. And so the place to put him was the show that I had. So they let me go and they put Mancow on there. He lasted 6 months. And I truly believe, I mean, I don't know the guy, but I truly believe, based on what I listened to, is that's what he was doing. He was trying to do conservative talk radio from sort of his perspective or whatever. But I remember I was at WGN then after that. And Milt Rosenberg, was that his name, who did the late evening show? He came
yeah.
up to me one day. You're Jerry Agar. And I said, yes. I mean, he was kind of a legend, right? And he said, why'd they let you go over there? And I said, well, they wanted Mancow on there to do conservative radio. And he kind of looked at me and I said, I think he's pretending to be a conservative. And Milt went, I can see that.
And Milt
Huh?
really, he really, I didn't really know the guy, but he was really conservative. And he was quiet. Like his delivery was very mild, but
Well, he was very different. He was professorial because he was, in fact, a professor, correct?
yes, and he was highly educated and
Hmm.
yeah, and also but the best man cow segment I heard, like I didn't listen to him a lot, but I did listen some I have a friend or I had a friend who I worked with who loved the guy, so I started listening to him again. This is in recent years. And one of the best topics he talked about was this pastor in Illinois who ended up being a very angry person, and he allegedly said all these things. And Mancow played all this audio of the pastor, and he gave commentary, and it was like radio gold to me because it really did come from his experience and it came from his true opinions. And he was also disillusioned about this pastor because he'd been going to that church and he knew the pastor, but then he realized he really, did he really know him? So that was
Yeah.
some of the best Mancow I ever heard.
Oh, I think that when Mancow was on FM radio before they put him on in and to replace me, he was very, very good. And so, there's quite a difference though, isn't there? Like I don't think that I could have gone, well, I know I could not have gone on an FM radio station playing rock and roll and entertaining in Chicago and beaten Mancow. I would not have beaten him. But if on talk radio, any day you want to bring him in and put him up against me on talk radio, I'm happy to have you do it because you've just made it easier for me. Like we don't belong in the same environment.
Yeah. Well, now, have you always been this passionate and intense? Like
Yeah,
since you were a kid or?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Jerry could shut up in class, that kind of stuff on the report card. I found my old report cards. The two common themes were that I talked too much and I could do better if I just applied myself. Well, I only applied myself to the subject I cared about.
But
Uh,
when you were but when you were in music radio, did you think to yourself, were you conservative during music radio? Did you want to do talk radio?
well, I wasn't conservative when I was young. I might have been passionate, but I wasn't conservative. I fit that Churchill thing, if you're young and you're not a liberal, you have no heart. And if you're old and you're not a conservative, you have no brain, that kind of thing. Whether he said it or not, it's been attributed to him. But I think I started to become more conservative and more interested in the issues of the day as I got older, which is not uncommon. And because when you're
But
young
wait,
and
which issues? Like American issues, Canadian issues, what issues?
well, just the political issues of how we're being impacted by um, taxes, government policy, social issues, that kind of thing. And because when you're young, to a large degree, your problems are looked after by your parents. And so if the taxes go up, you don't really notice it. And social issues, well, you only worry about those within your cadre of friends. You don't really look at how it's impacting society in general, that kind of thing. And when I first got into radio, it was because I used to lay awake at night and listen to radio stations that I could tune in all around North America. And I was heavily into rock and roll. If you want to test me on early rock and roll trivia, go ahead. Like I really was into that. And at first it was exciting to be a disc jockey on the radio and playing all the hits and that kind of stuff. I think where I started, I think I can tell you a time where I kind of went, I don't know about this. Like I was on the radio in Knoxville, and that was right when American Idol hit. And we didn't talk about it on this one morning show. And then we met with the consultant and the program director, and they were all over me about why we weren't talking about American Idol. And I said, well, how much audience share do they have? And I don't know. I mean, it was good, right? But let's say it was 10%. Okay, so what you're telling me is 90% of the people listening to me didn't watch it at all, but that's what you think I should talk about. And they didn't like that, because it was all about popular entertainment. And I was losing it. I watched American Idol at that time, but I don't know. I started to think we should talk about more meaningful things.
Mhm.
In fact, do you remember a guy named Kid Craddock?
No, I don't know who that is.
Okay, Kid Craddock was a disc jockey in Dallas. And many, many years ago, he was a really smart guy. And he was one of the first to see the potential of what he could do with the internet. And he created a thing called Bitboard. And if you signed up for Bitboard, you were the only one in your city, in your market, to be allowed to be on it. You paid a fee, which is how he made his money, but you also committed to put up once a week, you had to put up a report of good ideas for a radio bit or a contact, or here's a person you could have on your show. And so you had all these radio shows feeding one another. And then he extended that and he did a morning show boot camp in Dallas. And what I'm bringing up here is a thing that he told us that impacted me. And he said, I had a radio show in Dallas. It's a big market. Okay, I'm successful. I wasn't number one, but I was doing okay. And I was doing all the things you're supposed to do in the morning radio, talk about the popular TV shows and the movies and, all of that kind of stuff. And he said, I took a week off. I went to New York City. I'm walking along with my friends on the sidewalk by a construction site. We turned the corner and there was a dead guy hanging upside down on the chain link fence. And about Wednesday or Thursday of my week back, it occurred to me. I told everybody I know that story, except my listeners. So I told them. And he said, it changed everything. And I became number one because I talked to people the way they talk to one another. People don't sit around just talking about innocuous TV shows all day long. They don't.
So why do you think that shows do that?
Because I think consultants tell them to, or I think a lot of people come on the radio and they're afraid to really actually be themselves.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, yeah, and I was gonna say like, well, you've been on the air for how many years have you been on the air? When did you get into radio?
October the 9th, 1973.
Okay, so you've been on the air
You
for
do
a
the
while.
math. I'm not young.
Yeah. So yeah, like 50 over 50 years. And so throughout the years, how did you, or especially in talk radio, how did you know how to choose content? I mean, has it changed over the years?
Oh, tremendously. I remember we were talking about working for Terrell Matheny, and Terrell had retired and was going through boxes and throwing stuff away. And he found a tape of me and he mailed it to me. It was awful. I thought, oh my God, why did he even put me on the air? And at that point, I was doing talk radio at KMBZ in Kansas City. And I went down the hall to the program director, Neil Larimore. I love that guy. And I said, you got to listen to this. And because I told you I was horrible. He goes, you weren't horrible. I said, yeah, we got to listen to this. And he listened to it. He goes, oh my God, you were horrible. And I walked in and I was halfway down the hall and I came back and I said, give me the tape. And he said, no, that was going to be the Christmas party. But
Right.
I was never really a good disc jockey. I don't think. I think there's a musicality to being a disc jockey too. Like there's like being a singer and a rhythm and that kind of stuff that I don't think I ever had. And then maybe too, I wasn't talking about the right things. I wasn't being me. I was, we should talk about this thing. Like we should talk about this to me is kind of dangerous unless you actually literally know what you should talk about. Sometimes you look at a story and everybody, a producer, there could be the producer and the board op and the program director all sitting in the room and you all look at each other and go, well, there's radio gold right there. Like sometimes it's just too obvious, right?
Well,
Um,
if you weren't a good disc jockey, then why did you get hired? Why did you keep getting hired?
well, I don't know. I mean, I listened to that tape. I thought, who the hell wanted to hire this guy? Maybe it was because I didn't cost very much.
Yeah, well, I mean, but maybe back then because there are more outlets. I don't know. What was
Yeah.
radio like in the 70s?
Well, there were a lot of outlets, and it used to be a situation where even in 2010, when I came here to Toronto, I recall that what happened was they lost Bill Carroll, who went from this radio station to KHJ in Los Angeles. And so they were looking for somebody. And Mike Ben Dixon was the program director. And he called Phil Boyce, who had been the program director of WABC and sort of over the program directors of all the ABC Disney stations. And what he said was, I want somebody new, not one of the people who's been rotating around town. You used to be able to rotate around town. Not so easy now. Stations under control of more companies. And also, even in Canada, I was telling you in that first podcast that we did that the power in charge of radio, the analogous to the FCC, the CRTC, allowed fewer radio stations per capita, and that helped protect radio, but not so much anymore. In fact, at lunch today with a friend who used to be my producer, and I was telling him I was going to be on with you. And you had sent me the link to that first podcast we did. And as we were leaving, I told him I got to go home. I'm going to do this interview. And I said, I got to listen on the way home. And so I just emailed it to him. And he sends me a note a little bit later. And it said, yeah, that part about protecting Canadian radio jobs didn't work out very well, did it?
Oh
And
my God.
so, in that period of time, that last decade and a half, so to speak, it's just, they've devastated the population of radio stations. And,
So what,
I
when did
use
all
that
this,
word on purpose. They've devastated the population of radio stations. I mean, I go into that building I'm in right now. It's like working out of a warehouse. It's
yeah,
just
because I remember going
unbelievable.
in, yeah, because I remember going in there and there were a lot of people working there.
Yes, there were. Now you would come
So,
in and ask whether COVID is over in Canada.
but when did that all change?
Well, I think it started to happen maybe extensively the last 6 or 7 years. And you've got the radio stations here in Toronto are all owned by these big media companies. The company that owns my radio station is Bell Media. Well, that's not who owned it when I first got the job. It was a radio company, but Bell Media primarily is Bell Canada. Like it's Alexander Graham Bell. It's a telephone company. It's the AT&T of Canada, and then it was, oh well, we'll be the internet service, and we'll be and TV, and so they're a big media company, and quite frankly, they don't give a damn about the radio station. I mean, I don't care if
I
they see
mean,
a podcast. I've said that on the radio. The people that own this station don't care about it. I've said that.
well, yeah, but then why, how come you're not fired for saying that?
Um, well, I'll tell you why. Because there was when they first bought the operation, um, they somebody in management decided that part of his job, because having sold internet and phones, of course, he knew everything about broadcasting. He made a dictate to CTV News, which is part of our operation, the number one newscast at night in Canada, that they couldn't do something or other. And Lisa LaFlamme was the anchor and a true news person. And she said, it isn't going to work that way. And she did it, whether he wanted to or not. And that created a big firestorm. And they ended up firing that executive, not her. They fired her later, but that was years later. And because they realized we just stepped in it. Don't dictate the news. And I think I got a little bit of a firewall of protection there where they might not like some of the things I say, but they leave that alone.
Hmm. But now, what the change in Canada with these corporations owning things, do they also change the laws? Because remember in the U.S. they used to also limit ownership, and then that changed, and it became more
More
hugely
liberal in
corporate.
that way. You could own more stations and that kind
Yeah.
of thing. Yeah, I believe so. I don't know. I don't quite honestly keep track of the, vicissitudes of that sort of aspect of the business, but I really believe what happened there is they wanted the TV operation. And then, we tagged along.
Hmm.
And they happened to buy us right at the time where it's harder to make money in radio than it used to be.
Yeah. Yeah. What was it like back in the day, like 40 years ago or whatever, when there was money in radio?
Well, there was money in radio, and you would have, like, I recall even when I first got here to this radio station in 2010, our morning show had a morning host, a board operator, two producers, um, a news team, a sports guy. It was a huge group of people who did the
Well,
morning show.
but isn't that also like technology changing or not? What do you think about that?
No, no, here's
Because,
here's what we have now. The morning guy, one producer, the board operator who also fills in doing some other stuff. So it's kind of a part-time operate the board for the morning show and do this other stuff during the day. And the news comes from the other side of the city from somebody working for the television operation. We have no newsroom. They're gone. There is no sports report. That not only did the sports guide get let go, the whole concept of doing a sports cast we got rid of. Now, on the other hand, there are sports talk stations, so there may not be a lot of utility in doing that. But still, it's gone from You need a person to do this? Okay. You know, it was because radio stations were printing money there for a while. So were newspapers. The internet changed everything, but I think also it's the perfect storm of the internet and bean counters running the radio station instead of radio people running the radio station.
But also, like nowadays, people can get, for instance, sports information so many different ways. Do they need somebody on the air? I'm just,
No, maybe
suggesting this
not.
idea. Do they need somebody?
No,
Yeah, that's
especially
what I
if
say
what
about
you're
the
doing.
technology.
I don't disagree with that. In fact, I'll tell you, I don't know why we do traffic reports. And the young ladies who do traffic in morning and afternoon for us are wonderful people, and I don't want to see them lose a job. But they let's face it, see this thing? It's got all the traffic information I need, right up to date, by the moment.
Yeah,
And
but
so we can sell it.
Yeah, but I was also going to say that the good thing about traffic reports, though, is they tell you actually what's going on. Like they'll say there's an accident in the right lane, da da da. And on the apps, they don't necessarily say that. They just give you a red line, and you just think, okay, things are slowing down. What's
Well,
going
what
on
app are you
here?
using?
Well, and I use Google Maps, but
Well, so do I. But Google Apps and Waze, they will tell you there's a car stalled ahead. They will
yeah,
also, do you notice it'll ask you, is the car still there?
that's true. Yeah,
And then,
that's
you
true.
click no, they're going to change but there's no possible way for the radio to keep up to that.
Yeah.
As far
But
as I'm
that's if
concerned.
people actually report this stuff because sometimes I've been stuck and there wasn't a reason. I couldn't, the app wasn't explaining anything.
Oh,
So,
okay. Well, it's true. You can get some of that. But and the people who do it for us do a very good job. They really do. But I really think people get in their car and they fire up their app.
okay.
I fire up the app before I leave to see how long it's possibly going to take me. It's very good at predicting, unless there's an accident after I left. I mean, there's nothing you can do about that. But we've got all that technology. You don't need me for news headlines. You don't need me for sports scores. You don't need me for any of that stuff. So the only thing I can bring to it is analysis and opinion.
Well, on your station, do they have live shows 24/7?
No.
Oh, okay. That's different because I think back then when I saw you, they did.
We did. And for a while we did. Now we have another thing that pisses me off. And I'm not talking behind the backs of management, believe me. They're very aware of what I think. We have our morning show goes live at 6. It's morning show, there's me, there's a few other shows. And then at 6 o'clock, they run the audio of television news from 6 to 7. And I hate it. And I was driving somewhere the other day and it was just before 6. I thought, okay, I'm going to put the station on, see how long I last. I don't think I was 45 seconds into it before the host. Now, as you can see behind me, okay, I'm gone. They
Mhm.
will not accommodate us. They're doing a
Yeah.
television newscast as far as they're concerned, and I understand what they're doing, but it's not radio.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I mean, the issue with radio is like I love it and certain people love it. And it's just that it's because we were exposed to it a long time ago. But I think now people coming up, they don't understand the excitement of it, or they don't, there's not a lot of live, or it's just changed. The media landscape has changed. What do you think about that?
Well, I think the media landscape has changed, and our challenge in terms of younger people is my format of talk radio was never appealing to young people anyway. I mean, talk radio has always existed in some way or another. I mean, WGN, that companion radio that you talked about, it was talk radio, certainly forever. Every decent sized city had various music stations and maybe some stations doing talk, but every one of them had that legendary radio station that 80% of the adults listened to that did the traffic and the weather and the sports scores and all that stuff that you couldn't get instantly on your phone. They were your companion. They filled you in the morning. And in Chicago, it was WGN. And here in Toronto, it was the station I'm on now, which was called CFRB. We call it Newstalk 1010 now. I've suggested we just call it Talk 1010 because we don't need the news. The news is on your phone. I'll tell you what I think is going on in the news. You can find that on your phone too, but you can't find it as much for. I'm in a big enough city. I don't know if you knew this, or most people, most Americans wouldn't realize this. Toronto is the fourth largest city in North America. It's Mexico City, New York City, Los Angeles, Toronto, Chicago. Toronto is bigger than Chicago.
Yeah.
I think the whole metro area may be bigger around Chicago, but the fact of the matter is it's a big city with a lot going on. And so I talk about Toronto. So that narrows down, like if you want to go on the phone and find all kinds of stuff about one city, that's not as easy as the national news, which is all on your. And so to me, to a large extent, hyper localizing it in a big market, that's what I talk about.
Okay, now I did ask you this before, but I just want to know now, 14 years later, what do you see the difference between the US and Canada? Like how do you perceive the difference and even in the media landscape? I mean, do you feel like you're in a very different country, even though you're from there? Because how many years do you spend here?
Oh, I was 25 years in the US.
Okay. And then,
Um,
so now that is Canada like more laid back? And what's it like compared to the US?
well, would you say that the United States is hyper partisan, like you're conservative or you're liberal and you hate the other team, and there's a lot of that kind of rancor going on. Maybe not in the average person's life, but in sort of the realm that we're in with talk radio and people who follow politics and that kind of stuff. You're either happy Trump got elected or you can't believe this fascist Nazi rapist, whatever, any pejorative they can come up with. And Ellen left the country. By the way, the only celebrity who threatened to whoever actually did it. But there's that kind of thing going on. And Canadians like to think that they're different than that. Yeah, they should read my text board.
Like what? I mean, what's it like? I
No,
mean,
Canadians, a certain segment of Canadians are just as exercised about the Trump thing as Americans are. And we don't even, it's not our country. We don't, you can't vote for him. What do but it's just insane.
was it because I mean, does the president really affect Canada? Our president, does it
Sure.
affect?
If
Okay,
he
so
put
maybe
that
that's why they're upset.
25% tariff in place that he said he would, that would hugely affect Canada.
Okay, so that's why they're upset, even though
Well,
they did
they were
it.
upset. People hate Trump anyway. Our morning show host was had a Trump derangement syndrome the entire time that Trump was president. He talked about him every day.
Is it still the same guy interviewed Chris? No, I forgot his name. When I was there several years ago, now I forgot his name, but I think he came from Montreal before. Who's the morning guy?
Oh, John Moore.
Oh, John Moore. John Moore. I'm sorry. Yes. Is he still the morning guy?
Oh, did you interview him?
Yes.
I didn't know that. Yeah, still the same guy.
Okay. So that's interesting because he's totally different from you.
Yes.
But okay, but what about in terms of like Chicago versus I've been to Toronto several times, but what do you see a difference between Chicago and Toronto in terms of the kinds of people, the city, etc.,
I
the
see.
culture?
Do you think it's fair to say that Chicago is kind of like what you might call a working class city? The blue
Sort of, although
collar.
it's sort of. I mean, it's sort of changed on the north side. The vibe has sort of changed, but
Okay, well, maybe Evanston was never that way, but I mean, you know what I mean.
yeah.
Uh, you know that bit they used to do on Saturday Night Live, Dub Bears, like
Yeah, I still
it's
yeah.
that kind of thing. I think that Toronto has always thought that it was a more sophisticated city than that, but I kind of like that aspect of Chicago, to be honest.
Okay.
I like Chicago a lot, and we also have various other, things. We're both lake cities. We're both on perched on the edge of which affects the weather in much the same kinds of ways. The a number of the issues to me are not that different. Like you just hey, I'm going to go on the air today and bitch about City Hall. What town do I have to be in, really?
Right. Yeah, that's true. But I mean, in terms of, I noticed when I go to Toronto, people seem more subdued or something. Is it less competitive or it seems like less maybe because the US is bigger, but it seems less hyper um competitive or people's personalities seem milder. Is it just me as a foreigner thinking that?
Yeah, I think some people have described it as, America, a revolutionary country where individualism and freedom and leave me the hell alone matters. And Canada was kind of founded on peace, order, and good government. So there is a little more reticence there. And I don't think it helps Canada. I think that can do, I'm going to go for it, entrepreneurial American spirit is a good thing. And any Canadian who doesn't like that, take a look at the American economy and the Canadian economy right now. Our dollar's worth 71 cents. compared to the American dollar. So we need some more people who are willing to kick ass and take names in this country, I think. So there is that.
Well, when you were in the US, did you feel like you were Canadian?
I felt very comfortable in the US.
Okay. Did you ever become
And
a citizen here?
a couple of times I was on the verge of doing that. I wanted to. And then I would lose my job and have to move across the country, and that would upset that whole apple cart because you kind of have to have a permanent address in order to become, you know, and then my whole focus would become, okay, I got to drop that right now because I'm moving to Kansas City, and and I'd get established in Kansas City, and then something else. Actually, I was established very well in Kansas City. It was going really nicely. But when somebody calls you up and says, "Hey, why don't you do a mid-morning show on WLS in Chicago, and then we'll have you do an evening show on WABC?" Well, if you want to succeed as a talk show host, only an idiot would turn that down.
Yeah.
You know, that's what happened there. But that was part of it. I moved a lot, and it just interfered with that process. That's an
But did you,
excuse more than a
but
reason.
did you feel like, I mean, I know that, Canada's on top of the US, but did you feel different from Americans? Or did you feel like, oh, th these kinds of things I do is typical Canadian or whatever?
No, no, I
Yeah.
actually thought, I fit in pretty well here. I thought that in some ways I fit in better in the United States sometimes than I did here. I was a curiosity when I came on the air here, because I sounded like an American talk show host, not through any accent or anything like that. It was just the attitude, but that attitude wasn't, I didn't pick that up because I hung around in the United States. I was like that when I got there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, your accent's definitely not American.
No,
So,
what do you
and
think it
actually,
is?
well, and you didn't change your accent when you came here?
No.
Okay. Yeah, because I noticed like one time I was on, my husband and I were in Toronto and we were on a subway or something. And I said to him, "Hey, we have to make sure we get off." I just like said something to him and everybody in the car looked at us. And I thought, I don't think I sound like them because why is everybody looking at me? It's probably because I was speaking loudly, but it's probably my
Well,
accent or something.
I think, I worked in Knoxville and I worked in Raleigh, and it's probably true that if I had stayed in one of those towns, I would have, without even realizing it, picked up a bit of an accent because I remember the first time I was ever in Nashville. I was there for a convention. I was only there for like 3 or 4 days, and I had a rental car. And I was on my way to the airport, stopped at the last place to fill a rental car and then turn it in with a full gas tank. And it looked to me like they were closing down the station. It was a long time ago. It was before every station had, self pumps. And there was actually literally a guy out in the parking lot with a big shop broom cleaning the parking lot. And I'd only been there 3 or 4 days. And I got out of the car. I couldn't believe I did this. I got out of the car and I said, "Are y'all fixing to close?" I don't talk like that. I don't say y'all. I don't say fixing. But I just said it. I didn't even like it. That Southern way of speaking can get in you pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think a lot of people move there to pick up the accent. Or they pick up certain phrases, especially y'all.
Yeah.
But okay, so let's go back because I know we talked about this in the first podcast, but that was so many years ago. Can you please, now that you've been in the business for over 50 years, can you just describe your journey and then also what you've learned? Like describe, your career. Because how many stations did you work at?
Oh my God. Let me see. I'm from a very small town of about 800 people in Manitoba, Canada.
Now, what's that like? What's it like to be? You guys have really cold winters, by the way. I
Oh,
went there.
well, sure. When I was a kid, my first job was delivering the newspaper. And in the winter, January, February, it could get literally to 40 below. And but I was cool with growing up there. I mean, Led Zeppelin never played Gilbert Plains, Manitoba, so that was a bit of a downer for a rock and roll fan like me. But other than that, pretty free and easy way to grow up back in the days when I was growing up in a little town. You could just run around all over the place and nobody cared. And 20 miles down the road was the local radio station in Dauphin, Manitoba. And I just hounded them once I got out of school. I just hounded them until an opportunity presented itself there. Then I worked there for a while. Then I went to a station in Regina, Saskatchewan, which is a move up. Another station in Manitoba, and then I moved to the United States because I had met who became my wife.
Okay,
And
wait, before you describe the United States, somebody has a question. This is from Facebook.
oh, okay,
Tom Appel. He said, what is it that radio provides that is truly unique?
as opposed to a podcast or
Yeah, as
something.
opposed to something else. Yeah.
Um, I think when it comes to music, nothing. So I would be worried if I had a music station. I mean, what the hell have you got? Like you can get music streaming services to learn what you like to hear. They're going to give you a better playlist than any radio station ever could. I'm surprised some of the music stations are still on the air. It's hard for me to believe. In terms of talk radio, I think it's what I mentioned a little bit earlier, which is a discussion of what's going on in the community. And it's not just me lecturing listeners about the reality. It's taking calls and or bringing a guest on. It's one thing to read a headline that the mayor is going to do such and such, but when the mayor comes on with a host who's willing to push a little bit, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that that's what we have to offer, and but that's also what a podcast could offer. It's just difficult to start a podcast and get the mayor to be willing to come on with you. But I think that's going to change. I mean, why do you think they've put us on iHeart? Why do you think they're constantly? I'm constantly saying on the air, "Hey, earlier I did this and this," and if you missed it, you just go online and podcast Jerry Agar, and you can listen to it because our audience is moving away from the radio to the internet stream in order to listen to our programming. Are we still radio? I don't know. We're still content. That's what we are.
Yeah, it's content. Well, and also, I mean, people do live stream. That's why Joe Rogan's popular because if you have the somebody running for president, he's on your show for 3 hours and it's live, that's pretty exciting. So,
Yes. The only thing that matters live on television anymore is sports,
yeah.
right? I
Well,
mean,
also, like I
I
think
watch a lot
reporting
of
from a
TV shows.
seat
Do you watch any TV shows at the time they broadcasted on a network?
sometimes, but I've been watching a lot of BritBox stuff, but
A lot of what?
sometimes BritBox, BritBox. It's British TV.
Oh, okay.
But it's because their acting is so good, so.
Okay, but are you watching the show live when it or do
Sometimes
you?
I do like on National Geographic if something comes up, I'll watch it, but that's on cable. But it's not literally live. They're just airing it at that time.
No,
So
no, but I don't even watch. I don't even know when most of the shows I watch are on. I just if I find a show I really like, then I just set it up to record the episodes of that thing, and then I go to my PVR and I just watch whatever I want to watch. And
well, also the WGN Channel 9 morning show is really good. I'll watch that
okay,
live.
all right,
They have I think it's very creative, it's informative, it's really good to get you going. I feel like I'm promoting them, but I am. And they're real I think
okay,
that's a good one. That's
all
live.
right.
But I don't know.
But they as well. How much longer is that going to be? You need a television. I mean, nobody. Do you have an antenna?
No, of course not.
Well, of course not. So it's all moving to the internet, and then I don't know. What are we? We're content on the internet. We're all
Yeah.
content on the internet now.
Yeah, it's
So when
content.
you say, what does the radio station have to offer? Nothing. So what I do on a day-to-day basis, why can't somebody else in Toronto do that? Well,
Mhm.
other people are, they work at radio stations, but I'm not aware of a podcast in Toronto that has any success competing with those of us in radio. But it's for what I went back to earlier. Because how do they monetize it? How do they actually give up every day, all day, Monday to Friday, just to do their show? You can't do it
Yeah.
unless you happen to be wealthy and then you want to have this hobby. And if you happen to be good at your hobby, then maybe you'd gain an audience. But for the most part, the reason, that's why we're not being beaten right now by somebody in a podcast is because nobody has decided to monetize it to that effect.
Right. And then you have to also capture the audience in Toronto. I mean, you have to also figure out if people are always already doing it on the air, what's your unique angle to make it popular in Toronto?
Well, I worry about what are the people on radio who are competing with me doing. And they're doing the same thing I do. Show up every morning. They've got producers. They're planning a show. All that work goes into it. So you can listen to me. You can listen to my newest competitor is a guy named Ben Mulroney, who's the son of a former prime minister of this country who had a television broadcasting career for a while. They've just recently put him on the radio against me on our main competitor. And then you have the public broadcasting CBC and the incredible amounts of money they blow just putting a show together every day. It's unbelievable. And so now you come along with your podcast. "Oh, I'll take all of that on." Well, somebody will someday. It just hasn't happened yet. But
Yeah.
and then by the way, the answer to that question, what will radio have to offer? Even less.
Hmm.
I
Well, it's
think.
very positive of you. Now, okay, let's go back to your radio career. So you went to the US because you met your wife?
Yeah, I met her at the last Canadian radio station I worked at. She was traveling in support of a traveling show that we sponsored, the radio station, and I met her. And eventually, I left what I was doing. I'd gotten out of radio for a little bit, and I went down to Chicago, where she was. Found a sales job because I couldn't find a radio job. Nobody in the city of Chicago wanted to talk to me. I worked in
Eh,
smaller markets in Canada. Like they were just, who are
So
you?
when was that? What year was that? What year,
I
decade
think it
was
was
that?
around the time the Bears won the Super Bowl.
Okay, then the 80s. Okay.
Yeah. And so I had this job where I was selling housewares to places like the Ace stores and stuff like that. And I went out to Geneva, St. Charles, and I was calling on an Ace store. And I pulled into the parking lot, and that building over there is a radio station. I was unaware of the concept of suburban radio. Okay. And so I did my sales call. I locked everything in the car and I walked over to the building. And I walked in and I asked for the program director. And I said, hi, here's who I am. And I worked in radio in Canada. I walked in there unannounced, no appointment, nothing. I walked out as the weekend morning host. They couldn't believe somebody who had actually done radio before walked into their radio station. That was the major difference between downtown Chicago and, out in the suburbs. And so I did that. And then from there, I worked in music radio in places like St. Cloud, Minnesota, um, Tucson, Arizona. I did work in Minneapolis, which is the largest market I worked in music. And I've been Toledo, Ohio, which I mentioned earlier. But I was bouncing around in small to kind of medium at best markets. Tucson's a very nice city, by the way, but it's not a big radio market, right?
Right.
And Knoxville, I mean, I like the people, I like the job, but it wasn't a big radio market, wasn't paying a lot of money. And I know I said this to you 15 years ago when we did a podcast. Um, I was never going to be a big time disc jockey. That was obvious. And so when I lost the job in Knoxville, I decided to take the time where they had to pay me for a while. And I said to my wife, I'm going to look for a talk radio job while I'm being paid. And if I don't find one, I got to find something else to do. I'm going to age out of being the new morning guy on a music station. And I got lucky enough to get the job in Raleigh. And sometimes, if I have any regret in life, I should have done talk radio much, much sooner because I bounced around those small and sort of lower edge medium market, trying to be a morning show host of some success and had none. And in a relatively short period of time, when I became a talk show host and took a couple of years to figure it out, and I know the day that it changed, I I went Raleigh, North Carolina, Kansas City, Chicago, New York.
Mhm.
I thought, damn, I should have done
Yeah.
this sooner. I might
But
have been.
maybe you didn't have the maturity. I don't know. Sometimes,
Oh,
sometimes
that
you're
could
not
be.
ready.
That could be.
Yeah.
That's also probably true. Yeah, should have done it 10 years earlier. Probably wasn't ready.
When also talk radio wasn't necessarily, it didn't really take off more in the late 80s.
Well, that's the other thing. Talk radio really started taking off, well, because of Rush.
Hmm.
Right? I mean,
Yeah.
people had AM radio stations. They were thinking, why don't I just turn in the license? And then all of a sudden, well, who's this guy? Who's this guy? I can put him on my station from noon to 3 Eastern, whatever time zone you were in. I can put him on, and he's a phenomenon. And then I can build around that. I put on a morning show, and literally, he saved many AM radio stations, I think, and changed the face of talk radio and radio generally. And so yeah, he opened up a door for me that wasn't there. But had I somehow limped my way into a talk radio station earlier, I would have been in that position where they were all of a sudden looking for people to syndicate and all that stuff. So I don't think about it very much, but because it didn't happen. So whatever, move on. I have a good job. But that's where that was.
Now, so over the years, what have you learned, in the 50 years, other than you wish you got into talk radio earlier?
Well, I think it took me a long time, and maybe even in talk radio, it took me a while to learn how to be really me and talk to people. You know, it's easy to say, go on the radio, just literally be yourself And here's a little bit of a radio technique. You talk to one person, not a group of people. You talk to one person. You don't say, well, as all of you know, you say, as you know. Like it's a simple concept and just be yourself. A very simple concept. So is the song is A, A minor, D. Okay, here's the guitar. Go ahead. Like it's like that. It's very hard for people to be themselves on the radio. Some people are naturals, but most people aren't.
Well, I think it's also because some people are not, they're not comfortable where they are. They don't know who they are, or so many people operate in a facade. It reminds me of a Rush song. Okay, you're from Canada, so there you go. Rush is
Okay.
my favorite rock band, but like Neil Peart was, he wrote those lyrics about, being in the limelight. It's like what you seem. They respond to you how you seem instead of how you actually are, and that's what fame is like. You're seeming.
Yes. And I worked with a longtime radio professional. He had one of those traditional radio voices. He had served in Vietnam. And I'll never forget this one example of he, we were sitting in the newsroom and he was regaling us with the story of the time he took on a whole brigade of the Viet Cong with his typewriter because he was like a war correspondent. And it was hilarious. It was hilarious. And then he would go on the radio earlier this afternoon. And he just couldn't do it. He couldn't put his personality on the radio. It was like when Bob Dole ran for president. He couldn't be Bob Dole, and so he didn't win.
Well, there are many reasons why I didn't. But then
Okay, but
also,
that was
yeah,
one.
actually, it's funny. It's funny you mentioned Bob Dole because we went to when the Holocaust Museum opened up in D.C. We went to D.C. and I actually saw Bob Dole, and he seemed like very. I don't know where he was, but he's very tall and he was like joking around with people. I'm like, that doesn't seem like the guy I've seen on TV, but he seemed more
When
affable or something.
when I was at KMBZ Kansas City, we had to deal with some publisher that did the kinds of books like for people like Bob Dole, and he had written a book. And the deal was you'd buy a ticket, you go to the lunch, and we hosted the lunch. And your ticket included a copy of the book, and then he would sit down and autograph, but also there'd be a speech. And Bob Dole got up there and he was fantastic. He was hilarious. And he did that for about 10 minutes and then he stopped and he went, I know what you're thinking. If I'd have done this, I'd have been president. So
Well, I
he
don't know.
knew, but he couldn't do
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
it's more than that. But also another thing that happened in radio, there was this really big trend with zoo, zoo style.
Yes.
So that took over. So then people created all these zoo personas throughout the country. So,
Sure, put together a really cool group of people and just riff your way through the morning. It's a great show if you have the right group of people.
yeah.
I thought we had it when I was doing the morning show in Knoxville, but this became one of the points of friction between me and management. I said, "Look, our station's only doing so well. We're playing oldies music, which is going to age itself out anyway. And quite frankly, we have a better morning crew put together here than our number one competitor. How about we just drop the music, okay?" Because I'm telling you, we've got the people to do it.
Yeah.
They couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. We had to play 8 songs an hour or whatever the hell it was.
Oh, yeah. Another thing is you were talking about Bob Dole. Have you ever met Rush Limbaugh?
Yes.
Or had you ever met? Okay, so what was he like?
Very quiet, I thought. Turned it on a little bit when I started talking to him, like I interviewed him. But I thought basically just talking to him off the air, he was quiet and more humility than you might expect out of a guy with that success and that bombastic thing that he did on the radio. I'm not saying he was putting it on the radio. I think he 100% believed what he had to say on the radio. He just didn't think he had to be on when he wasn't on the radio, is how I
Okay.
view it.
Okay,
I
so
mean,
he was quiet, but was he like but wasn't he was he was in music radio before, so he already had a sort of a big personality, so he was
yes,
used to that.
yes.
Okay.
And he had that disc jockey understanding of timing and moving forward and the radio basics, and that's I have found in my career in talk radio, we'll bring in these people who their background is not broadcasting, their background is politics or used to be the mayor or that kind of thing. And it's hard to get them to understand how this is supposed to work. You're not given a political speech, okay? Like they just don't, some of them get it and they become pretty good radio hosts, but it takes a while.
Well, also they have to listen to people. I mean, that's like with podcasting too. People have to listen to podcasts if they want to do a certain kind of podcast, listen to the pros and then, learn something from it and instead of just like doing whatever you want and you think it's okay. So, Now, I was gonna say, another thing about broadcasting is how much prep do you do? Like, is your entire life reading politics and so forth, or how do you do it?
No, my entire life is not reading politics, but too much of my life, like so many people, is checking the phone.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, it's an addiction. And I mean, I've had a couple of times I'd be watching a baseball game. I'm a huge baseball fan. I watch,
Blue
I
Jays?
have, I can see them from here. I have over there some file folders where I have filled out the scorecard for every single Blue Jays game that season, every one. So I'm a big baseball fan. But even then, I'm obsessed and I'm sitting there watching and I realize I'm also trolling on my phone. Sometimes I throw it across the room onto the sofa so I can't reach it. But but in a sense, that's also show prep because I want to know what's going on.
But
You know,
then how do you know, like, what if you go on the air and then there's a caller? Because I've heard this before from certain people. So, like, you go on the air and there's a caller, and it sounds like the caller knows more about the topic than you do. Do you dump them? Because I noticed that Rush would
no,
do that sometimes.
no. Well, okay. Well, tell me some more then. And
Well, that's
then
my little theory. Well,
well,
it seemed like when the callers sort of they weren't rude or anything, but it seemed like when they had a little bit more knowledge and it really didn't fit into his delivery. I bet my theory is that he dumped them and then he just kept talking. But
maybe he did. No, I meant tell me more, not I was saying I would say that to caller. Well, okay,
okay.
then yeah, what tell you, well, how do you know? Sometimes they don't know. It's just giving you BS. But one of the beautiful things about modern communication is I'm watching my text board all the time. And if somebody starts to feed me BS, I don't know exactly, I don't know exactly what he's talking about. He either knows more about this or he's just making it up. It doesn't take very long if they're making it up for texts to start coming in going, well, this is BS. This is
Mm,
not true.
okay. So if somebody sounds like they do know, they're saying you do literally say tell you more. I thought you were telling me to tell you more, but
No,
okay.
no, no. But sometimes, well, I see. To me, I welcome this. Let's say that I'm talking about some issue of something that's going on with the airlines, and all of a sudden I take a call, and here's Mary, and Mary goes, "Hey, I'm a flight attendant, and here's what I can tell you." Well, okay. I mean, she's going to know what she's talking about. There's always the chance she's not a flight attendant. That doesn't usually happen with flight attendant. It'll happen with well, I'm a doctor, and it doesn't take very long to tell you, no, you're not.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of thing. But if you get a call who actually knows what they're talking about, why not let them talk?
Yeah. Okay, now I've gotta go soon. I gotta hit the road soon to go to my job.
Okay.
But is there anything else that you want to talk about? Because I know you're very talkative, which is great, and you're very entertaining. So anything else?
I would say if anybody was considering doing this, I don't care what how you want to do it on the air, if you want to do a podcast, you want to do a YouTube video every day, or whatever you want to do. What's your passion? Don't do what I do simply because you think that's what has to be done. What's your passion? Is it making cakes like that woman I mentioned earlier? I mean, there are people successful on YouTube opening new games. Like, I don't get it, but what's your passion? Do that. And if somebody comes and gives you advice on how to present yourself, listen. Maybe don't argue with them. I've done this with consultants. Listen, okay, thanks. And then ask yourself, is that me? Is that really me? Because if not, don't do it. Just be you. Famous example, couldn't quite make it in Nashville. Everybody knew he was a talent. They tried to put him on TV, slicked him up in a suit and the whole deal. And finally, he got so tired of it, he went to Austin. Willie Nelson
Oh yeah.
put on jeans, grew his hair out, did whatever the hell he wanted, and became one of the biggest things ever in country music because he finally decided, screw you, I'm Willie Nelson.
Yeah, and but sometimes like being yourself, it doesn't work out. I mean, sometimes when you're yourself, it doesn't jive with certain people, or they get envious or something, and then they try to throw you over. But I mean, I
Okay,
think
but
it's
there's
also
also okay, Margaret, but here's the fact. Not everybody can be a success at this, okay?
yeah,
But I'm saying fail being you. Don't fail being what somebody else told you to be because you can't be what somebody else tells you to be. So try you and see if that works.
yeah. And that's also, I guess that's also sort of true in life too. I mean, you
Yeah,
want to be, where people accept you. And I did want to say that the best advice I got about podcasting actually came from Tom Langmeyer, who was the general manager of WGN,
yeah. I
because
worked with him.
I was, yeah, he gave me the best advice. He's a complete radio, very passionate. But yeah, he said to me, when you ask people questions, do follow-up questions, listen to what they're saying and do follow-up questions. Because I guess until that time, early on, I was just like, I had all these questions lined up that I wanted to ask. So yeah, you should,
Well,
there are certain people who give you advice.
I'll
Yeah.
give you a quick example of what paying attention like that means. Have you ever heard the name Paul Bernardo or Carla Homolka?
No.
Okay, well, no Canadian doesn't know those names. This is a couple who were capturing, torturing, and murdering young women, one of whom was the sister of Carla Homolka. And I have a guy who comes on my show on a regular basis. He used to be a homicide detective, and he talks about crime issues and stuff like that. And they videotaped themselves while they were doing it. And we were talking about something completely different. And he just said, as he was going along, kind of like when I watched the Paul Bernardo tapes, and then I went, whoa, wait a minute. You just said you watched those tapes. What was that like? And then that was the conversation. He said they did it with glee.
Oh my gosh.
And it was like listening to him, I could have missed all that because he wasn't intending to talk about it. It was just he was a homicide detective. So it was just one of the things he threw in. And, but there would be listeners who go, wait a minute, wait a minute. Yeah. Sometimes the gold comes from something you didn't expect, right? That's what Tom Langmeyer was talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, he gave great advice. I was gonna say that Tom Appel, who asked that question, he said Tom Appel, he's a car expert and he's also on the air on WGN, but he's also got a podcast. He's very, very good at broadcasting. He's not like he wasn't trained to be a broadcaster, but he's a natural. And he said, "Thanks, Jerry. That was great. Thanks."
All right. Well,
Uh,
thank you.
and anything else, like, because we anything else you feel like you didn't cover 14 years ago?
No, I am passionate about what I do, and I'm very passionate about that point that I wanted to make about be yourself. I mean, I was asked by a person I know who teaches a radio course to come on, and it was during COVID, so it was all on Zoom, and to talk to the class, and I brought that up. This was so frustrating because I talked about that. I said, my main thing I want to tell you is be yourself. And then they could ask questions. And the first person, she says to me, well, I don't think you have enough liberals on your show. I said, so what you heard from me is that I should be more of what you want me to be. Is that what you got from this? And then
Yeah,
I decided to leave it alone after that because the person who actually teaches the class is a friend of mine. So I didn't want to say, what kind of a dumbass are you? I just told you, be you, not me. And I'm not
right.
going to be you, you
Yeah.
stupid little liberal twit.
Yeah, so basically you're saying that you became more conservative because you had more responsibilities in life, etc.
Well, it was a natural life evolution. It wasn't a broadcasting evolution.
Right.
No, it's just, because by that time I was starting to catch on to the idea, be you. I mean, I'll tell you a quick thing. When I transitioned from music radio to talk radio, it was difficult at first because I did come from an environment of don't tick anybody off.
Mm.
And so I was trying to make that, transition and figure out how to do talk radio. And I don't know how long into my career in Raleigh this was, but I was doing my show, and then the news came on, and they reported that PETA was in town in Raleigh, and they had parked themselves on the sidewalk in front of a McDonald's, and they had aprons on that were all covered in blood, and they had actual chef's knives with pig's blood or something dripping off the knives, and they were accosting mom and the kids going to McDonald's. I heard this on the news and I flipped out. And I just went on the air and I kind of flipped out about it. And I just, went on the kind of rants that I do. And I did it. And then I broke for commercials. And I was sitting there thinking, okay, was that all right? And the door opened. The program director of an FM station down the hall, here's all he did. It changed my life. He opened the door. He pointed at me like that. Yes. And he walked away. And I thought,
Wow.
I know who I am. It
That's
was like
powerful.
that. Yeah, it was right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna stop the live
Okay.
stream. So thank you.